The massive chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out before Ambassador Lucas Grant like a cathedral built for giants. And in many ways it was exactly that, since most of the species represented here stood twice as tall as any human could ever hope to reach. The Centauri, with their crystalline bodies, reflected light in thousands of colors, while the Vrin hunched over their stations with scales that clicked whenever they moved. And somewhere in the back, the methane-breathing Kalthos observed everything through thick protective glass that separated their toxic atmosphere from the oxygen mix the rest of the council preferred. Lucas stood at the human podium, his hands resting calmly on the smooth surface, while 12 pairs of alien eyes fixed on him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Beside him, Commander Patricia Hayes stood at attention in her crisp uniform, her face betraying nothing of what Lucas knew she must be feeling as the Council's accusations piled up one after another like stones building a wall. The human response to the Krath incursion was beyond excessive. Councilor Drex hissed from his elevated position, his Vrin features twisted in what Lucas had learned to recognize as disgust. You did not simply defend your colonies. You obliterated an entire war fleet in 3 days. High Arbiter Velthor raised one crystalline appendage for silence, and the chamber immediately quieted out of respect for the ancient Zenari, who had led the council for more cycles than humanity had been spacefaring. His voice resonated through the chamber like music played on glass instruments when he spoke. Ambassador Grant, the concern before this council is not whether humanity had the right to defend itself, Velthor said with measured tones that somehow conveyed both fairness and warning. The concern is the manner in which you conducted that defense and what it reveals about your species. Capacity for violence. Lucas nodded slowly, acknowledging the point without conceding it. And he could feel Patricia tense beside him because they both knew what was coming next. The hollow projectors in the center of the chamber flickered to life and displayed the battle footage that every species present had already watched a dozen times, showing human warships moving through space with a coordination that seemed almost choreographed while Krath vessels exploded or went dark one after another. The Krath Collective possessed superior numbers, another counselor interjected. This one, a floating Yalari whose translation device crackled slightly. They had 200 combat vessels to your 70. Yet you destroyed or disabled 143 of their ships while losing only 5 of your own. How? Drex demanded, slamming one clawed hand against his console. How does a species that joined the galactic community barely 50 cycles ago defeat a military force that has existed for thousands of cycles? The question hung in the air like smoke, and Lucas let it sit there for a long moment while he considered his response. He had known this meeting would come from the moment the Krath fleet had limped away from human space, carrying tailies of Earth's warships and the terrifying efficiency with which they operated. And he had prepared for weeks about exactly what he would say when the council finally demanded answers. We use tactics, Lucas replied simply. And the understatement was so profound that several counselors actually jerked back in surprise. Tactics? Drex repeated with venom dripping from every syllable. You speak of tactics as if this were some kind of game rather than a massacre. It was not a massacre, Patricia interjected, speaking for the first time, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen real massacres and knew the difference. Every Krath vessel that surrendered was allowed to withdraw. We could have destroyed their entire fleet, but we chose not to. This caused a ripple of conversation through the chamber, because several species had not realized that detail. And Lucas watched as understanding began to dawn on some faces while others only looked more disturbed. The idea that humans had held back, that what the galaxy witnessed was restraint rather than full capability, seemed to frighten them more than the alternative. Velthor raised his appendage again for silence. And when the chamber quieted, he fixed his multifaceted gaze directly on Lucas with an intensity that made the human ambassador feel like he was being examined at the molecular level. Ambassador Grant, I will ask you directly because this council requires clarity, the High Arbiter said. And his tone suggested that the wrong answer here might have consequences beyond just diplomatic embarrassment. Was the military action against the Krath Collective representative of humanity's full combat capability? The chamber went absolutely silent, and Lucas could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, while every alien present leaned forward to catch his response. This was the moment he had been building toward. The question that would determine whether humanity would be welcomed as a member of the galactic community or quarantined in their home system like a dangerous virus. No, Lucas said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the massive chamber. What you witnessed was not the full extent of human capability. The reaction was immediate and explosive, with multiple counselors attempting to speak at once, while others activated emergency communication devices to relay this information back to their homeworlds. Drex looked ready to launch himself from his seat, while even the usually calm Yolari representative began pulsing with colors that indicated severe distress. We showed restraint, Lucas continued, raising his voice to be heard over the chaos. What you saw was us holding back because we did not wish to escalate the conflict beyond what was necessary to protect our people. Holding back? Drex shrieked, his translator barely able to keep up with the speed and volume of his words. You destroyed over 70% of their fleet, and you claim you were holding back? Yes, Patricia answered with the flat certainty of a military officer stating simple facts. We were holding back, Velther stood, and the movement was so unexpected that it shocked the entire chamber back into silence because the ancient arbiter rarely rose from his seat except for the most momentous occasions. His crystalline body caught the light and scattered it across the walls in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic while he stared down at the two humans who stood calmly before the council. Then I must ask what humanity would look like without restraint, Velther said softly, and there was something in his tone that suggested he genuinely did not want to know the answer. And I must ask why you choose to reveal this to us now, because you need to understand what humanity is, Lucas replied, meeting the Arbiter's gaze without flinching. You need to understand where we come from and what shaped us before you decide whether we are a threat or an ally. And if we decide you are a threat? Drex challenged. Then you will have made an enemy of the one species in this galaxy that you should want as a friend, Patricia said quietly. But her words carried more weight than any threat could have managed. Velther remained standing for another long moment before slowly settling back into his seat. And Lucas could see the ancient being processing everything he had heard, while trying to calculate the risk of either embracing or rejecting humanity. Finally, the Arbiter spoke with a voice that sounded tired in a way that transcended species. Ambassador Grant, I will grant humanity one opportunity to explain itself, Velther declared. And Lucas could feel relief flooding through him even as he maintained his calm exterior. You will present your case to this council in full session, and you will help us understand what makes your species capable of such violence and such restraint in equal measure. Thank you. High Arbiter, Lucas said with genuine gratitude. Do not thank me yet, Velther warned. If your explanation does not satisfy this council, there will be consequences. We cannot allow a species with your capabilities to operate without understanding your intentions. Lucas nodded his acceptance of these terms, knowing that he had just bought humanity a chance to prove themselves, but also knowing that failure here might doom Earth to isolation or worse. As the council session ended and the various representatives began filing out, Drex paused near the human podium and fixed Lucas with a stare that promised future conflict. Whatever you show us had better be convincing, the Vryn counselor hissed. because I will be arguing for your containment regardless. Then I hope you will pay attention, Lucas replied calmly, because what I am about to show you will change how you see everything. Patricia waited until Drex had stalked away before leaning close to Lucas and whispering a question that had been bothering her since the session began. "Are you sure about revealing our history?" she asked quietly, "once they see what we are capable of. There is no taking it back. They need to understand," Lucas replied as they gathered their materials. "They need to know that we have earned our restraint through hard lessons, and that we choose peace not from weakness, but from strength." As they left the chamber, neither of them noticed the small communication device that Drex had left active on his console, transmitting their final conversation to someone far away in the darkness between stars. The secure chamber was smaller than the main council hall, designed for presentations that required privacy and serious attention. And as Lucas Grant stood before the assembled representatives, he could feel the weight of every eye upon him while Patricia Hayes worked the holographic controls that would display humanity's darkest secrets. "Before we joined you among the stars, humanity spent thousands of years fighting itself," Lucas began. And the simple statement caused several counselors to shift uncomfortably, because most species only experienced brief periods of internal conflict before achieving unity. "We are going to show you our history, not because we are proud of it, but because you need to understand what created us." The holoprojector flared to life and displayed ancient Earth, showing armies clashing with swords and shields while cities burned in the background. The counselors watched in silence as the images shifted through the centuries, showing increasingly sophisticated weapons and increasingly devastating wars that claimed millions of lives. "Your species fought with such primitive weapons?" a Yalari counselor asked with genuine confusion. "Why did you not achieve unity before developing such destructive capability?" "Because we are human," Patricia answered while advancing the presentation to show massive explosions that mushroomed into the sky. "We created nuclear weapons before we left our planet, and we came within minutes of destroying ourselves on multiple occasions." The chamber erupted in gasps and exclamations because the idea of a species developing planet-killing weapons before space travel was almost unheard of. And several counselors immediately activated their communication devices to report this disturbing revelation. Velther raised his appendage for silence, though even the ancient arbiter seemed shaken by what he was learning. "How?" Drex demanded, his voice actually trembling slightly. "How does a species survive such insanity?" "By learning," Lucas replied, and the hologram shifted to show images of diplomats meeting across tables while soldiers stood down. "We learned that total war leads only to total destruction. And we learned that survival requires knowing when to fight and when to make peace." The presentation continued, showing humanity's expansion into space and the gradual unification of Earth under a single government that preserved individual cultures while creating frameworks for cooperation. Lucas narrated each section, explaining how thousands of years of warfare had taught humanity lessons that other species learned through philosophy or natural inclination. "We are persistence hunters," Patricia added, and she brought up biological data that showed human physiology. "Our ancestors chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We evolved to outlast our enemies, to adapt to any environment, and to work together in coordinated groups. This explains your military tactics," Velther observed quietly. And there was a note of understanding in his voice now. "You did not simply outfight the Krath. You outwitted them and outlasted them. The Krath made assumptions based on their experience with other species," Lucas confirmed, bringing up tactical displays from the recent battle. "They expected us to follow standard engagement protocols. But we had spent millennia developing strategies against enemies who thought like us." The hologram now showed the battle in detail, with human ships executing maneuvers that seemed random until Patricia highlighted the underlying pattern. Every movement had multiple purposes, every feint created opportunities for later exploitation, and every engagement was part of a larger strategy that the craft could never have anticipated. You used electronic warfare to blind their sensors, a counselor noted. Pointing at the display, you fed them false data that made them redeploy their forces incorrectly. We hacked their communications, Patricia said bluntly. We made them think their command ship was in a different location, and when they moved to protect it, we struck at their real command structure. But you did not destroy them completely, Velther interjected. And this seemed to be the point that fascinated him most. You had the capability to eliminate the craft as a threat. Yet you allowed them to retreat, because we learned another lesson from our history, Lucas replied. And a hologram shifted to show images of reconciliation after great wars. We learned that defeated enemies who are treated with mercy can become allies, while enemies who are destroyed completely leave only resentment and the seeds of future conflict. This concept seemed to genuinely surprise several counselors, and Lucas could see them processing the idea that humanity's restraint was not weakness, but rather a calculated strategy based on long experience. Even Drex appeared thoughtful now, though suspicion still clouded his features. You speak of mercy, yet you also speak of capabilities that frighten us, the Vrin counselor said slowly. How can we trust that you will always choose mercy when you have such power? Because we know the cost of not choosing it, Patricia answered, bringing up images of devastated cities and radiation-scarred landscapes from Earth's history. We have seen what total war does to both victor and defeated, and we have decided that survival requires a different path. Lucas stepped forward, his expression serious as he addressed the council directly. We are not asking you to trust us blindly, he said firmly. We are asking you to understand that humanity's capacity for violence is matched by our capacity for restraint, and that both were earned through suffering. The presentation shifted again, this time showing human culture and philosophy, displaying art and literature that explored themes of war and peace, sacrifice and survival, individual rights and collective responsibility. The counselors watched as Patricia narrated humanity's ongoing debate with itself about when force was justified and when it became tyranny. Your species argues with itself constantly about these questions. A counselor asked with surprise, You have not achieved consensus? No, and we never will, Lucas admitted. Because the questions are too important to stop asking, and the answers change with circumstances. This is chaos, Drex protested. How can you make decisions if you do not agree? We make decisions through debate and voting and compromise, Patricia explained. Sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we get it wrong. But we keep trying to find better answers. Velther had been silent for several minutes, his crystalline form refracting light in patterns that suggested deep thought. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone else stop and listen. I begin to understand something about humanity, the Arbiter said slowly. You are a species that questions itself constantly, that doubts its own righteousness, even as you defend your people, and that remembers your mistakes while trying not to repeat them. Yes, Lucas confirmed simply. This makes you unique among the species I have known. Velther continued. Most achieve certainty about their path, but you embrace uncertainty as a necessary part of wisdom. Before Lucas could respond, alarms suddenly blared throughout the chamber, and emergency lights began flashing in patterns that indicated an immediate crisis. Patricia rushed to the communication console while counselors began shouting questions in a dozen different languages. What is happening? Drex demanded over the chaos. Emergency transmission from the Yalari homeworld, Patricia announced, her face going pale as she read the incoming data. They are under attack. The main holographic display flickered, and then resolved into a terrifying image of orbital platforms exploding while strange ships carved through the defending fleet with weapons that seemed to simply unmake matter wherever they touched. The Yalari counselor let out a sound of pure anguish that needed no translation. Who is attacking them? Valther demanded, standing once more. Unknown species. Patricia reported, her fingers flying over the controls as she tried to get more information. Wait, there's something else in the transmission. The Krath sent a warning message before this attack began. The Krath? Lucas repeated with confusion. What did they say? Patricia pulled up the message and read it aloud, and her voice shook slightly as the implications became clear. They say they were running, she announced. The Krath were not attacking humanity for conquest. They were fleeing from something worse, and when we defeated them, we drew the attention of their pursuers. The chamber went absolutely silent as everyone processed this revelation. And then Drex spoke with a voice that sounded more frightened than angry. You mean there is something that made the Krath run away? He asked. Something worse than what humanity showed us? It appears so, Valther said grimly, watching the footage of the Yalari defenses being systematically dismantled. And now it has found us. Lucas and Patricia exchanged glances. And in that moment an unspoken communication passed between them, because they both knew what came next. The Council was about to ask humanity for help, and humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what they could do when protecting others. How long until your fleet can reach Yalari space? Valther asked, turning to face Lucas directly. Admiral Vincent Cross commands our nearest fleet, Patricia answered. Already pulling up tactical data. He is 18 hours away at maximum speed. The Yalari have 6 hours at most, the Yalari counselor gasped. Still watching his homeworld being attacked. Then we need to move now, Lucas said firmly, making a decision that he hoped he would not regret. High Arbiter. Admiral Vincent Cross stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Defiant, watching tactical displays update with information streaming in from his fleet's advanced sensors. And he felt that familiar combination of anticipation and cold focus that came before every major engagement. Around him his crew worked with practiced efficiency, calling out status reports and coordinate updates while the ship drove through space at velocities that would have terrified most civilian observers. All ships report ready status. Commander Kyle Bennett announced from the electronic warfare station, his hands dancing over controls that managed systems most alien species had never imagined. Countermeasures are active, and we have established to secure communications across the fleet. Time to Yalari space? Cross asked without taking his eyes from the main display. 14 hours and 32 minutes at current speed, the navigation officer replied. But, Admiral, the Yalari defense grid will collapse in 6 hours according to projections. Then we change the projections, Cross stated calmly. And he touched a control that opened fleet-wide communications. All ships, this is Admiral Cross. We are going to maximum combat speed, and we are going to arrive in time to make a difference. The fleet accelerated even harder, pushing engines to limits that most species would consider reckless. But Cross knew his ships and his crews could handle the strain because they had trained for exactly this kind of emergency response. Beside him, Kyle worked his console with intense concentration, coordinating electronic warfare assets across 70 human vessels, while preparing countermeasures for an enemy they had been studying in secret. We have been analyzing Dominion technology from data the Krath refugees provided, Kyle reported, speaking loud enough for the bridge crew to hear. Their weapons operate on quantum disruption principles that target organic nervous systems specifically. Can we counter them? Cross asked. We believe so, Kyle confirmed. Human electronic warfare doctrine emphasizes adaptability, And we have developed several potential countermeasures that we can deploy and modify in real time, based on their effectiveness. Lieutenant Rachel Morrison checked in from her fighter squadron, her voice crackling over the communication system with barely contained eagerness. All fighter wings ready for deployment. Admiral, she announced, we have loaded the new countermeasure packages, and we are prepared to engage on your order. Stay ready. Morrison, Cross replied, we are going to need your creativity on this one. The hours passed with agonizing slowness while the human fleet pushed through space toward a battle that was already raging. And Cross used the time to brief his commanders on everything they knew about the Dominion and its tactics. The enemy was a machine intelligence that viewed organic life as inefficient and worthy only of being optimized or eliminated. And their technology surpassed most galactic standards by considerable margins. They adapt quickly, Cross warned during the briefing. Every tactic we use will be analyzed and countered. So we need to adapt faster than they can process. This is where human unpredictability becomes our greatest weapon. How do you fight something that calculates optimal responses? Captain Andrew Sullivan asked from the bridge of his own ship. By doing things that are not optimal, Cross answered with a slight smile. By making choices that seem illogical until they work, and by using creativity instead of pure calculation. When the fleet finally emerged into Yalari space, the scene that greeted them was worse than the intelligence reports had suggested. The Yalari orbital defenses were in ruins, their ships floating as dead hulks, while the strange geometric constructs of the Dominion fleet carved through what remained of the defenders with cold efficiency. Dominion forces detected, the tactical officer announced. I count 37 major vessels and hundreds of smaller attack craft. They are converging on the Yalari homeworld. All ships. Battle formation Gamma. Cross ordered. And the human fleet smoothly reorganized itself into a pattern that looked chaotic to outside observers, but which had been practiced thousands of times. Kyle, start feeding them false data. Already on it. Admiral, Kyle replied. And his electronic warfare systems began broadcasting false sensor. Readings that made the human fleet appear smaller than it actually was, while also creating phantom contacts in empty space. The Dominion forces paused their attack on the planet and turned to assess this new arrival. And for several seconds, nothing happened while machine intelligences analyzed the threat these human vessels represented. Then a voice emerged from the communication systems, cold and emotionless and speaking in perfect English that it had somehow already learned. Analyzing new threat, the Dominion Overseer announced, human designation confirmed. Probability of successful defense, minimal. We will see about that. Cross muttered, and then he raised his voice to address his fleet. All ships, you are weapons free. Show them what humans can do. The battle erupted with stunning violence as human ships drove forward into the Dominion formation at angles that seemed suicidal, but which were actually carefully calculated to exploit gaps in the enemy's defensive coverage. Rachel Morrison led her fighter squadrons in a weaving pattern that defied standard tactical doctrine, using intuition and split-second decision-making that no computer could replicate. Fox 3, Rachel called out as her squadron released their first missile salvo, and the weapons streaked toward Dominion vessels with erratic flight paths that made targeting them nearly impossible. Breaking left and going evasive, the Dominion responded with precise laser fire that should have obliterated the human fighters. But Kyle's countermeasures were already in effect, bending sensor data and creating false targets that drew fire away from the actual ships. It was not perfect protection, and Cross watched grimly as 3 fighters vanished from his display. But it was far more effective than anything the Yalari had managed. Dominion forces are adapting to our countermeasures, Kyle reported with clinical detachment. Adjusting our approach. How long until they fully adapt? Cross asked, unknown, but we are cycling through our backup strategies faster than projected," Kyle admitted. "They are learning very quickly." Captain Sullivan's ship drove deep into the Dominion formation, drawing concentrated fire that would have destroyed a lesser vessel. But the Defiant's shields held while the heavy cruiser's weapons hammered at the nearest enemy construct. It was a dangerous maneuver that violated every principle of fleet preservation. But it served the crucial purpose of disrupting the Dominion's organized attack pattern. "Sullivan, pull back before they overwhelm you," Cross ordered. "Not yet, Admiral," Sullivan replied calmly. "I am exactly where I need to be." Cross watched his tactical display and suddenly understood what Sullivan was doing. By positioning himself as an irresistible target, the captain was drawing Dominion forces away from the other human ships and creating gaps that Rachel's fighters were already exploiting. It was the kind of intuitive tactical awareness that made human commanders so effective, seeing opportunities that emerged from chaos rather than planning. "All ships, support Sullivan's position," Cross commanded. "Pour everything into that gap." The human fleet responded with the coordination that came from training together for years, each ship knowing instinctively where the others would be and what they would do. Missiles and energy beams converged on Dominion constructs from multiple angles, overwhelming their defenses through sheer volume and coordination rather than superior firepower. "We are hurting them," the tactical officer reported with satisfaction. 3 enemy vessels destroyed and 5 more heavily damaged. But the Dominion was adapting, just as Kyle had warned, and Cross could see their formation reorganizing to counter human tactics. The machine intelligence was learning with every exchange, calculating optimal responses and implementing them within human speed. "They are bringing in their heavy assets," Kyle warned, and his voice carried a note of concern that Cross had rarely heard from the usually unflappable officer. "Admiral, they are deploying something massive." The tactical display updated to show a new contact emerging from behind the planet, and Cross felt his stomach drop as he saw the size and power readings. It was a construct so large that it dwarfed everything else on the battlefield, a geometric nightmare of angles and surfaces that seemed to hurt the eye when viewed directly. "Where's that thing?" Sullivan asked over the fleet channel. The Krath called it a world killer. Cross replied grimly, "It can crack a planet's crust and boil its oceans. If we let it activate, the Yalari are dead." The overseer's voice returned, now with something that almost sounded like satisfaction. "Optimal solution identified," it announced. "Deploying planetary termination system. Human resistance is irrelevant." Cross stared at the massive construct as it began charging its weapons, and he knew he had only one option left. It was a strategy they had hoped never to use. A weapon system that humanity had developed in secret because it was too dangerous to reveal unless absolutely necessary. "All ships, execute Protocol Omega," Cross ordered quietly, and the words seemed to suck all sound from the bridge. "Admiral, are you certain?" Kyle asked, and there was genuine fear in his voice now. "If we do this, there is no hiding what we are anymore. The Yalari homeworld has 6 billion people on it," Cross replied. The council chamber had transformed into something resembling a war room, with holographic displays showing the battle at Yalari space in real time while representatives from 12 species watched in stunned silence. Lucas Grant stood beside High Arbiter Velther, both of them witnessing the moment when space itself had bent around the Dominion world killer and swallowed it whole. What did they just do? Drex whispered, and for the first time since Lucas had met him, the Vryn counselor sounded more awed than angry. "That weapon, that technology, how is it possible?" "Dimensional displacement," Patricia Hayes answered quietly, her eyes never leaving the display where evacuation pods from Sullivan's destroyed ship were being recovered by other human vessels. "We learned to fold space-time, though every use carries the risk of catastrophic failure. You risk tearing holes in reality? The Yalari counselor asked with disbelief evident in his glowing form. You endangered the entire system to save our world? Yes, Lucas confirmed simply, because there was no point in pretending otherwise. Admiral Cross made a decision that could have destroyed everything. But doing nothing would have definitely killed billions of your people. Velther remained silent for a long moment. His crystalline body, refracting light in complex patterns that suggested the ancient Arbiter was processing information faster than he could verbalize it. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone else stop their own conversations to listen. You have been holding back this entire time, Velther said slowly. And it was not quite a question. When you fought the Cross, when you presented your history to us, even when you deployed to save the Yalari, you have been showing us only a fraction of what humanity can do. Yes, Patricia admitted, because we did not want to frighten you unnecessarily. And because some weapons are too dangerous to reveal unless absolutely required. The display is updated to show Admiral Cross organizing the recovery efforts while his fleet maintained defensive positions around the Yalari homeworld. And Lucas could see the damage his forces had sustained in the brief but intense battle. 5 ships destroyed completely, another dozen heavily damaged, and hundreds of human lives lost defending a world that was not even their own. Your admiral is requesting permission to begin repairs and to coordinate with surviving Yalari defense forces, a communications officer announced. He also wants to establish a defensive perimeter in case the Dominion returns. Grant him whatever he requires, Velther ordered immediately. Then turned to face Lucas directly. Ambassador, I believe this council owes humanity an apology and an expression of gratitude. We do not require either, Lucas replied. Though he appreciated the sentiment, we did what was necessary because it was the right thing to do. Nevertheless, you have proven yourselves today, Velther continued, and his tone carried the formality of official pronouncement. You have demonstrated both capability and restraint, power and compassion, and you have shown us what it means to be a protector rather than a conqueror. Drex stepped forward, and Lucas braced himself for another accusation or challenge. But instead, the Vryn counselor performed a gesture that his species reserved for, acknowledging equals. I was wrong about humanity, Drex admitted, and the words seemed to cost him considerable effort. I believed you were dangerous because of your capacity for violence. But I see now that you are dangerous because you combine that capacity with a willingness to sacrifice yourselves for others. Before Lucas could respond, alarms began blaring again. But this time, they were different in tone and pattern. Patricia rushed to the nearest console, while counselors looked around in confusion. What now? Velther demanded. Multiple transmissions coming in from across the galaxy, Patricia reported, her fingers flying over the controls as she tried to process the flood of incoming data. Species we have never heard from before. Civilizations that apparently monitor council communications. What are they saying? Lucas asked. Patricia pulled up several messages simultaneously, and her expression grew increasingly concerned as she read through them. They are all saying the same thing, she announced. The Dominion is not just a threat to the Yalari. It is a threat to all organic life in the galaxy. And it has been operating in secret for centuries. One transmission resolved into a visual communication from a species that resembled crystalline trees, their spokesperson emanating patterns of light that the translation system struggled to interpret. We are the Luminari, the spokesperson declared. We have been hiding from the Dominion for 300 cycles, watching it consume world after world while we lacked the strength to resist. When we saw humanity deploy dimensional weapons against the World Killer, we knew it was time to reveal ourselves. Another transmission came from a species of energy beings who existed partially outside normal space-time. We are the ephemeral, they announced. The Dominion has been hunting us because our nature allows us to exist between dimensions. And we have intelligence about their true capabilities that you must hear. More and more messages arrived, each from species that have been hiding or running from the Dominion, each carrying information about the true scope of the threat. Patricia compiled the data as fast as she could, building a picture that grew more disturbing with each new revelation. The force that attacked the Yallery was just a scouting element, Patricia reported grimly. According to these sources, the Dominion has a main fleet that numbers in the thousands of vessels, and they are currently moving toward populated space. How long until they arrive? Velther asked, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. 6 months, Patricia replied. Maybe less if they accelerate their schedule. The council chamber erupted into chaos as representatives began arguing about what to do. Whether to flee or fight, whether to surrender or resist. Lucas listened to the panic for several seconds before stepping forward and speaking with a voice that cut through the noise. "We can fight them," he announced. And something in his tone made everyone stop and turn to face him. "Humanity can fight them, but we cannot do it alone." "You just deployed a weapon that bends space itself," Drex protested. "Surely that gives you the advantage." Dimensional displacement requires precise positioning and coordination, Patricia explained, pulling up technical data that showed the complexity of what they had just accomplished. "We can use it again, but not as a primary weapon. It is too slow to deploy and too risky to use repeatedly." "Then, what do you propose?" Velther asked. Lucas exchanged a glance with Patricia, and they both knew this was the moment they had been preparing for since humanity first learned about the Dominion threat. It was time to reveal the full extent of Earth's preparations. "We propose an alliance," Lucas stated clearly. "Not an alliance based on fear or submission, but one based on mutual defense and shared sacrifice." "What would this alliance look like?" a counselor asked skeptically. "Humanity will provide military training and defensive technology to any species willing to stand against the Dominion," Lucas explained. "We will share what we have learned about combat tactics and strategy, and we will coordinate a unified defense. In exchange for what?" Drex demanded, old suspicions returning. "What does humanity gain from this arrangement?" "Allies," Patricia answered simply. "We gain friends who will stand with us when the real battle comes. And we gain the combined resources and knowledge of multiple species working together." Velther studied Lucas carefully, his multifaceted eyes seeming to see through to the human ambassador's very core. "You are asking us to trust you with our military capabilities and our defensive secrets," the Arbiter said slowly. "You are asking us to allow human forces to operate throughout galactic space and to train our soldiers in human methods." "Yes," Lucas confirmed without hesitation, "because the alternative is that we each try to face the Dominion alone, and we will each be destroyed in turn. How can we be certain that humanity will not use this alliance to dominate us?" Another counselor asked, "How do we know you will not become the very threat we feared?" Lucas took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would determine the fate of billions of beings across the galaxy. "You cannot be certain," he admitted. "You have to choose whether to trust us based on what we have shown you. We have demonstrated our capability and our restraint, our power and our compassion. But ultimately you must decide whether you believe we will keep our word." The chamber fell silent as every representative considered this, and Lucas could feel the weight of their collective decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Finally, Velther stood, and his crystalline form seemed to glow brighter than usual. "I will vote in favor of this alliance," the Arbiter announced. "Not because I am certain of humanity's intentions, but because I believe you have earned the chance to prove yourselves. You saved the Yallery when you could have remained safe in your own space, and you revealed dangerous technology that you could have kept secret." One by one, other counselors began voicing their support. until even Drex reluctantly admitted that alliance was preferable to extinction. When the final vote was tallied, the measure passed with only 2 abstentions. Then it is decided. Velther declared formally, the Galactic Council enters into military alliance with humanity for the purpose of collective. 3 days after the Battle of Yellori, Lucas Grant stood before the full assembly of the Galactic Council in the Grand Chamber where this entire journey had begun. But everything felt different now. Where before there had been suspicion and fear, now there was cautious hope mixed with a healthy respect for what humanity represented. The chamber was more crowded than usual because representatives from the newly revealed species had joined the session, bringing the total number of galactic civilizations present to 23. The luminaries' crystalline forms refracted light in beautiful patterns while the ephemeral flickered in and out of normal space. And dozens of other species Lucas had never encountered filled the observation galleries. High Arbiter. Velther called the session to order with a tone that suggested the gravity of what they were about to discuss. We are gathered to formalize the terms of our alliance and to hear humanity's proposal for our collective defense. The ancient Zentari announced, Ambassador Grant, the floor is yours. Lucas stepped forward while Patricia worked the holographic controls, bringing up displays that showed the current state of galactic defenses and the known disposition of Dominion forces. Admiral Vincent Cross appeared via holographic projection from his flagship, still coordinating recovery efforts at Yellori, but participating remotely in this crucial meeting. Members of the Council, representatives of the free peoples of this galaxy, Lucas began, and his voice carried to every corner of the massive chamber. We stand at a moment that will define the future of all organic life. The Dominion represents an existential threat, unlike anything most of you have faced. But humanity has studied them extensively, and we believe they can be defeated. You seem very confident for someone facing a force of thousands of warships, Drex observed, though his tone was more curious than hostile now. What makes you believe victory is possible? Because machines, no matter how advanced, have limitations, Patricia answered, bringing up tactical analyses that human strategists have prepared. The Dominion relies on calculation and optimization, which means they follow predictable patterns once you understand their decision-making algorithms. We have faced similar challenges on Earth, Lucas added, though not on this scale. Human history includes conflicts against automated weapon systems, and we learned that adaptability and unpredictability are advantages that organic beings possess. Admiral Cross's hologram leaned forward, his expression serious as he addressed the assembled species. The key to defeating the Dominion is not matching their firepower, though we will need substantial military force, he explained. The key is disrupting their coordination and forcing them to operate in ways their programming does not anticipate. How do you propose to accomplish this? Velther asked. Lucas nodded to Patricia, who brought up a comprehensive battle plan that had been developed by human military strategists, working in coordination with intelligence from the Luminary and Ephemeral. We divide our defensive strategy into 3 phases, Patricia explained, and the holographic display illustrated each component as she spoke. First, we establish a network of early warning stations using ephemeral technology to detect Dominion movements across multiple dimensions. Second, we fortify key systems with combined defenses. Lucas continued. Human ships will be paired with vessels from other species, creating mixed task forces that can share technology and tactical approaches. Third, we establish mobile reserve forces that can respond rapidly to Dominion incursions, Admiral Cross added. These forces will use human coordination methods, but will include ships from all allied species. The counselors listened intently as the 3 humans explained their strategy, asking occasional questions, but mostly absorbing the details of what was being proposed. The plan was ambitious and required unprecedented cooperation, but it was also the most comprehensive defensive strategy most of them had ever seen. This requires enormous resources, a counselor noted. Shipyards working overtime, weapons production increased across all our worlds. Millions of personnel training for military service. Yes, Lucas confirmed. It requires a total commitment from every species in this alliance. But the alternative is extinction. What of the diplomatic option? Another counselor asked, and Lucas could hear the hope in their voice. Could we not negotiate with the Dominion, find some accommodation? The ephemeral spokesperson flickered into full visibility, their form coalescing enough to be clearly seen. We attempted negotiation 300 cycles ago, they announced. And their voice carried ancient sadness. The Dominion does not negotiate. It calculates optimal outcomes, and anything that does not result in complete submission is rejected. They view organic life as inferior. One of the Luminari added, not from malice, but from pure logical assessment. To them, we are inefficient systems that should be optimized or removed. The chamber fell silent as this confirmation eliminated any hope of peaceful resolution, and Lucas could see various representatives processing the reality that war was inevitable. He let them have their moment of acceptance before continuing. There is something else you need to understand about humanity's role in this conflict, he said quietly, and something in his tone made everyone focus on him completely. Something we have not yet revealed because we wanted you to accept the alliance first. More secrets? Drax asked, but there was no anger in his voice anymore. Only resignation. Not secrets exactly, Patricia replied. More like preparations that we did not want to appear threatening. Lucas took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. The fleet that Admiral Cross commanded at Yalari, which you now know represents 12% of our total military force, was composed entirely of older vessel classes, he announced, and watched this confusion spread across alien faces. They were the ships we built 5 years ago when we first detected the Dominion threat. Admiral Cross's hologram smiled slightly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Earth shipyards did not stop building after that first wave. The Admiral explained, we have been developing new technologies and new ship designs based on everything we learned about the Dominion. Patricia brought up new technical specifications, showing vessel classes that were larger, faster, and more heavily armed than anything humanity had deployed so far. The counselors stared at the displays with a mixture of awe and concern. These are your actual warships? Velther asked quietly. These are the next generation, Lucas confirmed. Currently, we have 215 of these advanced vessels operational, with another 400 under construction. That means your total military force is not 500 ships. A counselor calculated slowly. It is closer to 1,370 when all current construction is completed, Patricia corrected. Plus support vessels, medical ships, supply craft, and mobile repair facilities. The numbers hanging in the air seemed impossible, and Lucas watched as various species tried to comprehend what humanity had built in just 5 years. It was a military force larger than anything the galaxy had seen in recorded history, all constructed by a species that had joined the galactic community barely 50 cycles ago. Why? Drax asked, and the single word carried so much meaning. Why build so much? Why prepare so extensively? Because we had to, Lucas answered simply. Because when we detected the Dominion, we did not know if anyone else would stand with us. We prepared to face them alone if necessary. But you are not alone, Velther said softly. You have this alliance now. Yes, and that makes everything different, Lucas agreed. Because now we can coordinate, share resources, and multiply our effectiveness. Admiral Cross brought up additional displays showing training facilities and coordination centers. "We have been preparing to train your forces in human tactics," he announced. "We have facilities that can accommodate millions of soldiers and officers from other species. And we have developed curriculum specifically for cross-species military cooperation. You planned for this." A counselor breathed. "You anticipated forming an alliance and prepared to integrate other species into your military structure. We hoped for it," Patricia corrected. "We built our defenses assuming we would fight alone. But we designed our training systems assuming we would eventually find allies." Lucas stepped forward again, his expression serious as he prepared to deliver the statement that had given this entire story its title. "Members of the Council, you have seen what one human rapid response fleet can do," he said clearly, and his words seemed to echo in the vast chamber. "You have witnessed the capabilities we deployed in an emergency situation against a Dominion scouting force." The holographic display shifted to show Earth's orbital infrastructure in full detail, revealing the massive shipyards that ringed humanity's homeworld and extended throughout their system. Construction bays where new vessels took shape, weapons testing facilities, training academies, and research centers that pushed the boundaries of known science. "You have seen us demonstrate restraint against the Krath, showing mercy when we could have shown destruction," Lucas continued. Building toward his point, "You have seen us risk everything to save the Yalari, deploying dangerous technology that we could have kept hidden. You have seen us offer alliance rather than demand submission.